Have you ever felt like there's a part of you don't really understand? Like, you're not sure who you really are anymore? I've been there too. Let me share something with you. Maybe it'll help you see things a little clearer. I've been thinking a lot about rejection lately. Not just the surface level sting of someone saying no or walking away, but the deeper kind, the kind that unsettles your sense of who you are. I used to think rejection was something to avoid at all costs, a kind of social death. But the more I sat with it, really sat with it, the more I realized it had something to show me. Something important. There was this time, I still remember the ache of it when I pour my heart into someone. I thought they saw me. You know that feeling, right? When you believe, even just for a moment, that someone finally gets you. And then it's gone. They pull away. No explanation that makes sense. Just that awful hollow in your chest, like someone kicked a hole through it. I spiraled. Not outwardly. I kept doing my daily routines, kept smiling when people asked how I was, but inside I was shrinking. Every hour was filled with questions. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? Why does this keep happening to me? I felt like I was breaking in ways I couldn't explain, like parts of me I didn't even know existed were collapsing under the weight of someone else's no. But here's the thing I couldn't see back then. Rejection isn't really about them. It's about what gets stirred up inside us when it happens. It shines a light on parts of ourselves we've disowned. And that's the brutal grace of it. Because if you're willing to look, it'll show you who you've been refusing to become. I started noticing this pattern. Every time I was rejected, romantically, socially, even professionally, it activated this same wound. This raw, anxious voice inside whispering, "You're not worthy unless someone else says so." And when I finally slowed down enough to listen, I saw how much of my identity I'd built on needing someone else's yes to feel like I mattered. That realization cracked something open in me. Not in a dramatic, overnight epiphany kind of way, but gradually like ice thawing after a long winter. I began to ask myself questions I had always avoided. Why do I need their approval? What am I really afraid of? Who am I trying to prove myself to? Them? Or the version of me I abandoned long ago? It wasn't easy to sit with those questions. They forced me to reckon with all the times I turned away from myself just to fit in, to be liked, to avoid the ache of being alone. But something inside me started to shift. Slowly, I stopped seeing rejection as a verdict on my worth and started seeing it as a mirror, a brutally honest one, reflecting where I still needed to come home to myself. One night, I sat alone in my room, lights off, just the hum of the city in the background, and I whispered, "Okay, let's do this. Let's feel it." And I cried. Not the kind of crying you do to get it over with. The kind that feels like something sacred is leaving your body. The kind that cleans you out. I wasn't crying because they left. I was crying because, for the first time, I realized I had left myself. That was the beginning of a very different journey. One where I started to see rejection not as the enemy, but as a kind of strange, unwelcome teacher. Not kind, not gentle, but honest. It forced me to notice all the parts of me I'd kept in the shadows. The parts that begged for approval, the parts that twisted themselves to be accepted, the parts that feared they weren't enough as they were. I'm not going to pretend like this insight made me immune to pain. It didn't, but it gave that pain context. It gave it meaning, and that made all the difference. Rejection isn't the end of something. It's the start of the most honest conversation you'll ever have with yourself. One where you finally ask, what have I been avoiding? What part of me have I locked away because I was afraid no one could love it? And if you stay in that space long enough, you start to hear a new voice, quieter, steadier. One that says, you're still here. You're still worthy. And maybe, just maybe, this isn't about them at all. That's where it all begins. Not with fixing yourself or proving your worth, but with listening deeply to the truth that rejection has been trying to show you all along. There's something quietly terrifying about how much we give away without realizing it. I'm talking about those moments when we crave approval so badly that we forget who we are. I used to think I was just being kind or considerate, trying to keep the peace, make people happy. But the truth? I was desperate for permission, for someone to tell me I was good enough. It's wild how subtle it starts. You laugh a little louder than you mean to. You say yes when your whole body wants to scream no. You dress a certain way, speak a certain way, share parts of yourself you hope they'll like, and hide the parts that might make them uncomfortable. And slowly, so slowly, you begin to disappear. I remember this one moment, years ago, that stayed with me like a scar. I was at a dinner with people I admired, people I wanted to impress. And I caught myself watching their reactions to every word I said, adjusting mid-sentence, abandoning my thoughts if I saw even a flicker of disapproval. By the end of the night, I didn't feel proud of how I connected. I felt hollow. I hadn't shown up. Someone else had, someone more polished, more agreeable, less real. That's the trap, isn't it? The more we chase approval, the further we drift from ourselves. And yet we tell ourselves it's just how things work. This is how you survive. This is how you're loved. But it's not love, it's performance. It's self-abandonment dressed up as likability. The worst part is that it doesn't even work. That hunger for validation, people can smell it. They may not consciously know it, but they feel it, that subtle undertone of need, of desperation. And instead of drawing them in, it pushes them away. Because neediness isn't connection. It's pressure. It's silent pleading, please complete me. Please see me, so I don't have to see myself. God, that realization hit hard. I had to sit with it for a long time. I saw how often I've been operating from that place. In friendships, relationships, even creative work. Everything was infused with this silent question. Do you approve of me? And I didn't even realize how much power I was giving away. It wasn't until I got tired, truly exhausted, that things began to shift. Not tired in a physical sense, but soul tired. I couldn't keep pretending. Couldn't keep being a version of myself that was constantly editing, pleasing, chasing crumbs of affection. And in that fatigue, something broke open. Or maybe something ancient woke up. I started asking myself, what if I just stopped? What if I stopped needing to be understood, to be accepted, to be liked? Who would I be then? At first, it felt like a free fall. Terrifying. Lonely. Like stepping into a dark room with no lights and no map. But then, slowly, I began to feel something else. Space. Stillness. A flicker of something real. That's when I started learning the difference between validation and connection. Validation is transactional. It asks, what can I give you so you'll love me? Connection is different. It doesn't beg. It simply shows up. It says, here I am, messy and whole. Take it or leave it. And here's the strange, beautiful twist when I stopped trying so hard, when I let go of needing to be approved of, people began to respond to me differently. They leaned in. They listened more. They respected my boundaries. It was as if something invisible had shifted, not in them, but in me. Because when you no longer need someone's approval, you stop performing. You start existing. And existing, really being there, grounded in your own skin. That's magnetic in a way that performance can never be. It's not about arrogance or indifference. It's about quiet inner dignity. A kind of enoughness that doesn't scream, doesn't prove, doesn't chase. It just is. I'm not perfect at this. I still catch myself slipping, replaying conversations, wondering if I said the right thing, scanning text for signs of disappointment. But I catch it now. I see the pattern before it takes over. And I remind myself, you're not here to be liked. You're here to be real. That one sentence, it saved me more times than I can count. I don't think we ever fully escape the desire to be seen and loved. We're human, but what changes everything is why we want it, whether it's to confirm our worth or simply to share our truth. One is fear, the other is freedom. And freedom, I've learned, starts the moment you decide to stop performing and start belonging first to yourself. I wish someone had told me earlier, you don't have to earn your worth. You don't have to hustle for it, shape-shift for it, apologize for it. Your worth was never up for negotiation in the first place. But no one really teaches us that, do they? Instead, we grow up absorbing these quiet, unspoken messages. Be good. Don't be too much. Make them proud. And without realizing it, we start dividing ourselves, hiding the messy, loud, angry, sensitive parts. We tuck away the desires that feel selfish or unreasonable. We push down our truth because we're afraid of being too different, too inconvenient, too real. That's how the shadow begins to form. I didn't know the term back then, not until I stumbled across Jung's writings. But even before I had a name for it, I felt it. That quiet shame, that gnawing sense of being not quite right. It followed me everywhere, whispering, if they see this side of you, they'll leave. So I kept performing, kept editing, kept smiling through things I didn't believe in and laughing at jokes that made me uncomfortable. And then something cracked. Not loudly, not publicly. It was just a quiet moment alone, sitting on the floor of my apartment with no distractions left to chase. I was tired, so damn tired. And the mask, it just fell. I remember whispering to myself, I don't want to keep hiding. Not from them, from me. That moment, that tiny, tremulous declaration, was the beginning of something wild and terrifying and holy. I started to look, not away, not above, into the parts of me I'd buried. The jealousy, the neediness, the anger, the dreams I dismissed, the fears I tried to outgrow. It was uncomfortable. God, it was uncomfortable. Like peeling off layers of skin. But it was also liberating. Because in the dark, in the places I thought would destroy me, I started finding myself. That's what no one tells you about the shadow. It's not evil. It's not the enemy. It's just the part of you that hasn't been loved yet. The part you exiled because someone once told you it wasn't acceptable. And once you start to listen, really listen, you hear that those parts were never trying to ruin your life. They were trying to protect you. In all the wrong ways, sure. But the intention was survival. Integrating my shadow wasn't a single moment. It still isn't. It's a slow, messy dance. One where I catch myself judging someone and ask, what is this reflecting in me? One where I feel envy and ask, what desire have I been suppressing? One where I spiral into comparison and gently remind myself, you're allowed to take up space too. And you know what's wild? The more I embraced those darker parts, the more I softened, the more I forgave, the more whole I became. Because I stopped seeing myself as a problem to fix and started seeing myself as a person to understand. There's this strange paradox. The more we suppress what we think is unlovable, the more those parts control us. But the moment we bring them into the light, when we sit with them, talk to them, embrace them, they lose their power. Not because they disappear, but because they're no longer exiled. They're home. That's what individuation really is, I think. Not becoming someone else. Not ascending to some flawless version of yourself. But becoming all of you. Every broken, beautiful, confused, courageous part. And you know what's even more surprising? People responded to this version of me. The one who wasn't hiding, with more love than I ever received while performing. Not always. Not everyone. But the right ones. The ones who mattered. And for the first time, I believed it. I wasn't suspicious of the love. Because I knew they were loving the real me. That's the gift of shadow work. Not that you become invincible, but that you become real. And when you're real, you don't need everyone to love you. You just need to love yourself enough that rejection no longer feels like death. It just feels like information. So if you're standing at that edge, if you're starting to see the cracks in the mask you've been wearing, I just want you to know you're not breaking down. You're breaking through. And on the other side isn't perfection. It's presence. It's peace. It's power. And maybe, just maybe it's you. The whole you. I used to be terrified of being alone. Not the practical kind of alone, like going to a movie or eating lunch by myself. I mean the kind of aloneness that makes your soul ache. The kind that whispers, no one really knows you. No one really sees you. There were times when silence felt unbearable. I keep the TV on just for background noise, scroll endlessly, make plans I didn't care about just to avoid sitting with myself. Because if I slowed down, if I really listened, I knew I'd have to face something I wasn't ready for. The truth that I didn't know how to be with me. It's ironic, isn't it? We crave connection so much, yet we run from the one connection that truly matters, the one with ourselves. But solitude, it has this quiet power. And I didn't understand that until I had no choice but to face it. I went through a season where things just fell apart. Relationships, routines, even parts of my identity I thought were solid. People drifted away. Invitations stopped coming. The noise died down. And suddenly there I was, sitting in the silence I'd avoided for so long. At first it was brutal. Every insecurity came rushing in like a flood. You're unlovable. You're forgettable. This is proof something's wrong with you. I cried a lot during those days. Not because I was weak, but because I was finally meeting the parts of myself I'd neglected for years. And then something shifted. One morning, I woke up and the silence felt different. Not threatening, not empty, just spacious. Like I had room to breathe, room to think, room to just be without anyone watching. That was the beginning of learning to love my own company. It didn't happen all at once. But little by little, I stopped filling every quiet moment. I started taking walks without my phone. I journaled. I sat on my porch and watched the sky change colors. I listened, not to podcasts or music, but to the voice I'd drowned out for years. And that voice, it surprised me. It wasn't critical or cold. It wasn't full of judgment. It was gentle, curious, sometimes sad, but always real. I began to realize that the solitude I'd feared wasn't loneliness at all. It was freedom. The kind of freedom that comes when you no longer need the world to reflect your worth back to you. When you stop looking out there and start rooting down in here. I won't pretend it was easy. There were still days I wanted someone to rescue me from the weight of it all. There were still moments I felt the sting of being misunderstood or left out. But the difference was this: I no longer felt like those moments could destroy me. They hurt, sure, but they didn't shake my foundation because I was finally building one. There's this unspoken belief that independence means cold detachment. That if you're not constantly surrounded by people or activity, something must be wrong. But I've learned that real independence isn't about rejecting others. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about being able to say, I want connection, but I don't need it to survive. That's powerful, because when you no longer need someone to validate you, you can choose relationships from a place of truth, not fear. You're no longer reaching out with empty hands, begging to be filled. You're meeting others as a whole person, not a half, hoping to be completed. Funny thing is, when you get to that place, people feel it. There's an energy to someone who's grounded in themselves. It's quiet but magnetic. You're not performing. You're not chasing. You're just there. And that presence is rare and beautiful. I still love deep connection. I still crave intimacy and shared laughter and the comfort of being known. But I don't fear the quiet anymore. I don't run from it, because I've discovered that in the stillness, I meet the most important person in my life, me. And that relationship, the one I used to avoid, is now the most sacred thing I have. So if you're in a season of solitude, I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not being punished. You're being invited to meet yourself, to come home, to build something unshakable inside. And when you do, everything changes. Because once you know who you are in the silence, no noise can ever drown you out again. There's a moment, a quiet, almost imperceptible one, when you realize the most painful rejection you've ever experienced didn't come from someone else. It came from you. I remember the first time I truly faced that truth. I was journaling, just letting thoughts spill out, when a sentence appeared that stopped me cold. I've spent more time abandoning myself than anyone else ever has. It hit like a punch to the chest. See, I'd spent years blaming others. The friend who disappeared when I needed them most. The partner who couldn't choose me. The opportunities that never came. And yes, those things hurt. Deeply. But the deeper wound, the one that bled quietly beneath it all, was the one I kept inflicting on myself. Every time I said yes when I meant no. Every time I laughed at things that weren't funny, stayed silent when I should have spoken, changed to fit into rooms that never felt right. I was the one leaving me. And that kind of self-rejection is the most dangerous, because it doesn't happen all at once. It's death by 1,000 cuts, tiny betrayals, repeated over time, until one day you wake up and don't recognize your own reflection. We're taught so early to trade authenticity for acceptance. It starts with subtle corrections. Don't say that, it's rude. That's not how a good boy/girl acts. Tone it down, so we learn to suppress, to twist ourselves into shapes that make others comfortable. And we call it maturity or politeness or being easygoing. But often it's just fear. Fear of being too much, or not enough, or simply wrong. That fear becomes a filter we apply to every decision. And without noticing, we start building a life that looks good on the outside but feels empty on the inside because it was never really ours. When I finally started confronting this, when I stopped pointing outward and turned inward, I had to ask myself hard questions like, where have I been lying to myself? What parts of me have I labeled too messy or too inconvenient to love? What dreams did I bury because they didn't match what was expected of me? It was sobering and heartbreaking, but also weirdly hopeful, because if I had the power to abandon myself, I also had the power to come back. That's when everything started to change. I began to notice the micro moments of self-abandonment, like when I downplayed my ideas in a meeting or ignored my intuition in favor of someone else's opinion. And instead of shaming myself, I got curious. I'd pause and ask, what am I afraid will happen if I choose me right now? Usually, the answer was something like, they won't like me. They'll think I'm selfish. I'll be alone. But here's what I realized. I was already alone in the most painful way because I wasn't even standing with myself. So I started practicing a new kind of loyalty, one that didn't require loud declarations or dramatic exits, just small, sacred choices, saying no when I meant it, saying yes when it lit something up inside me, allowing myself to feel, even when it was messy or inconvenient, speaking my truth even if my voice shook. At first, it felt foreign, like I was trying on clothes that didn't quite fit. But over time, it started to feel like coming home, to a self I had once known before all the masks and performances. And as I reconnected with that self, something remarkable happened. I stopped being so afraid of other people's no, because I wasn't saying no to me anymore. Their rejection still stung, sure, but no longer shattered me, because my worth wasn't hanging on their response. It was rooted in my own presence. There's a kind of quiet power that comes from choosing yourself. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It simply is steady, grounded, whole. And yes, it costs something. You'll lose some connections, some approval, some false sense of safety. But what you gain is so much more: clarity, peace, and the unshakable feeling of belonging, not to a group or a title or a role, but to yourself. So if you've been living with that subtle ache, that sense that something's off, I want you to know you're not broken. You're not too much. You're not behind. You're just ready to stop abandoning yourself, ready to meet the parts of you you've been running from, ready to become someone you trust. And that's not just healing. That's power. The kind that can't be taken from you. The kind that doesn't need permission. There's something that happens when you stop giving your power away. At first, it's not loud. There's no parade, no triumphant soundtrack playing in the background. It's quiet, like a calm after a storm. A moment when you realize, I don't need anyone else to tell me who I am anymore. That realization hits differently when you've spent most of your life outsourcing your self-worth. You start to see the mechanics of it, the way you scanned faces for approval, edited your words mid-sentence, replayed conversations wondering if you said the wrong thing. You remember how heavy it all felt, carrying that constant need to be liked, to be chosen, to be good enough. And then, one day you just stop, not out of anger, not out of arrogance, but because something in you gets tired of the game. You wake up and realize you don't want to perform anymore. You want peace. You want truth. You want to live without the weight of constantly questioning your own value. That's what I mean by owning your inner world. It's a shift that happens on the inside first. You stop asking, do they approve of me? And start asking, do I approve of me? You start living by your own values instead of bending to someone else's standards. You begin to trust your own voice more than the noise around you. It's subtle but powerful, like flipping a switch that was always there, hidden behind layers of fear and conditioning. And here's the wild part. Once you flip that switch, your entire reality starts to change. You begin to notice how many of your decisions were based on avoidance, avoiding rejection, avoiding discomfort, avoiding judgment. And you realize how small that made your life. How many chances you didn't take, how many truths you swallowed, how many parts of yourself you dimmed just to stay safe. But you're not that person anymore. You're not building your life around fear now. You're building it around choice. That's the real power, not the kind that dominates or controls. The kind that says, I know who I am. I know what matters to me. And I choose from that place. Not from insecurity, not from desperation, but from alignment. There's a line I once wrote in my journal during this time that I still go back to. You can't be free and be a people pleaser. It stung to read it, because I wanted both. I wanted to be loved and liked and chosen. And I also wanted to be free. But freedom asks more of us. It asks for honesty, integrity, a willingness to disappoint others rather than betray ourselves. And that's hard, especially when you've built your identity around being agreeable. I had to learn to sit with the discomfort of people misunderstanding me. I had to let go of the urge to explain myself, to defend every decision, to soften every truth so it wouldn't offend. And in that silence, in that gap between saying what I meant and waiting for the reaction, I found something I didn't expect, peace, because I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. That shift made everything feel different. Conversations, boundaries, even the way I walked into a room. I didn't need to be the smartest, the funniest, the most interesting. I just needed to be present, whole, honest. Of course, not everyone liked this new version of me. Some people drifted away. Some grew uncomfortable. That was painful. I won't pretend it wasn't. But it was also revealing. Because the ones who stayed, they saw me. Not the curated version. Me. And that's the beauty of stepping into your own power. The people who remain aren't drawn to your performance. They're drawn to your presence. That's what you build your life on. So if you're standing on the edge of this shift, if you're feeling the pull to stop performing, to stop begging for approval, to stop playing small, trust it. That's your soul waking up. That's your truth knocking. Let it in. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to speak your truth without apologizing. You're allowed to say, this is who I am, and that's enough. Because when you finally take ownership of your inner world, you stop living like a reaction and start living like a revolution. And you'll never want to go back. You ever notice how the people who seem to shine the brightest are often the ones who've stopped trying so hard to be seen? It took me a long time to realize that authenticity, real authenticity, is magnetic. Not because it's loud or polished or perfect, but because it's rare. Most of us spend so much time trying to be what we think others want. We forget what it feels like to just be ourselves. I've lived on both sides of that line. I've been the person who crafted every version of myself based on who was in the room. I was like water. I'd mold to any container just to be accepted. And for a while it worked. I was liked, included. But deep down, I always felt like a guest in my own life. Then something shifted. I got tired of walking on eggshells, tired of holding my breath, tired of asking, do you like me? Instead of, do I even like myself when I'm with you? And I started doing something radical. I let myself be seen. Not the highlight reel. The messy, flawed, uncertain parts. The parts one used to hide out of fear that someone would walk away. At first, it was terrifying. Vulnerability always is. But then it got easier because people responded. Not everyone, but the right ones. They didn't just tolerate the real me. They loved her. They met me with honesty and warmth, and something inside me softened. It turns out the thing we're most afraid of, being rejected for who we truly are, is also the thing that sets us free. Because when you let go of the performance, you stop attracting people who only love your mask. And suddenly, there's room for the kind of connection that doesn't ask you to shrink. That's when you begin to understand the difference between validation and resonance. Validation is external. It's applause, approval, agreement. It's nice, but fleeting and often conditional. Resonance is deeper. It's when someone sees you and says, I feel that too. It's when your truth stirs something in someone else. Not because you're trying to impress them, but because you're simply being you. And here's the kicker. You can't fake that. You can't manufacture resonance. You can only access it through honesty. So I stopped chasing validation. I stopped trying to predict what would make people like me. I started asking different questions. What feels true? What feels alive? What feels like me? Even if it's messy or misunderstood. And the more I chose truth, the more magnetic life became. People would tell me, there's something about you. And I'd smile because I knew what it was. It wasn't charm or confidence or any of the things I used to force. It was presence. Wholeness, the quiet power of someone who is no longer at war with themselves. That kind of authenticity pulls people in. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. And in a world full of filters and facades, realness is refreshing. But let me be honest, authenticity isn't always easy. There will be moments when you feel exposed. Moments when people misinterpret your softness as weakness or your boundaries as rejection. That's okay, because your job isn't to make everyone comfortable. Your job is to live in alignment with your truth. To create a life that feels good on the inside, not just one that looks good on the outside. And when you do that, something beautiful happens. The right people find you. People who aren't threatened by your wholeness. People who aren't looking for a version of you they can mold. People who love you, not despite your honesty, but because of it. That's when relationships deepen. That's when opportunities align. That's when your world begins to reflect the truth of who you are, not the image you worked so hard to maintain. So if you're standing at that edge, wondering whether it's worth it to stop performing, to show up as you are, to let go of needing to be everything to everyone, I want you to know it's worth it. You don't need to be more likable. You don't need to be more impressive. You just need to be true. Because the world doesn't need another perfect person. It needs more people who are real, who are brave enough to be themselves, who remind others that it's safe to be seen, not for who you pretend to be, but for who you are. And that's the real magic. That's the kind of magnetism no one can replicate, because it's not a performance. It's presence. And it starts the moment you say, "This is me. I'm enough." There's a quiet moment, usually at the end of a long day, or in the silence between thoughts, when something inside you asks, what if I had chosen myself sooner? And it's not a question filled with regret. It's a whisper of awakening, a realization that so much of your life was shaped by trying not to be rejected, when all along it was you who held the power to accept yourself. I don't think I ever really understood what self-acceptance meant until I looked at how often I rejected myself. Subtly, constantly. Not with harsh words, but with tiny denials. Brushing off compliments. Laughing at my own dreams before anyone else had the chance to. Playing small so others wouldn't feel threatened. Pretending I didn't care when I did, deeply. It's wild how normalized that becomes. You learn to call it humility, or emotional maturity, or being easy to get along with. But deep down, it's something else. It's fear. Fear that if you actually showed up, fully, unapologetically, people would turn away. So you get there first. You reject yourself before they can. But here's the truth that changed everything for me. The world's rejection can hurt. But your rejection? That's the one that leaves the deepest scars. Because you can't outrun yourself. No matter how many people you impress, how much success you collect, or how well you camouflage your pain. If you're not at home within yourself, you'll always feel like a stranger everywhere else. I had to learn, painfully and slowly, that real self-acceptance isn't about liking every part of myself. It's about refusing to abandon any part of myself, even the insecure ones, even the parts that still crave validation or make mistakes or feel fragile in the face of uncertainty. It's about sitting with yourself on your worst days and saying, I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere. That level of presence, it's life-altering. Because the moment you stop rejecting yourself, something sacred happens. The world loses its grip on you. External approval becomes nice, but not necessary. Criticism stings less. Comparison quiets down. And you begin to move through life with a kind of rootedness, not loud or showy, but unshakable. And here's the paradox. The more you accept yourself, the more the right people are drawn to you. Not because you're trying to impress them, but because there's nothing more magnetic than someone who doesn't need to be chosen to feel complete. People feel that energy. It's calming. It's trustworthy. It's rare. And yet, this isn't about perfection. There are still days I fall back into old patterns. Days I feel like I'm not enough. But I catch it now. I notice the pull to self-abandon, and I meet it with compassion, not shame. Because growth isn't about becoming flawless. It's about becoming faithful to yourself. Especially when it's hard. Especially when no one's watching. I want to say this as clearly as I can. You do not need to earn the right to exist exactly as you are. Not from your family, not from your partner, not from your friends or your followers or your boss, and definitely not from the ghosts of people you once tried to please. You are not here to perform. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You're not here to fit into boxes that were never meant for someone like you. You are here to be whole, to be you, even when that you is still in progress. Especially then, because every time you choose yourself, gently, consistently, bravely, you reclaim something sacred. And over time, that choice becomes a habit. That habit becomes a truth. And that truth becomes your freedom. So if you're wondering when it's your turn to stop living according to other people's expectations, it's now. If you're waiting for a sign to stop shrinking yourself just to be accepted, this is it. And if you're searching for permission to finally, fully, unapologetically belong to yourself, you already have it. Because the most beautiful transformation doesn't come from becoming someone new. It comes from remembering who you've been all along and finally deciding that's enough. If this felt meaningful to you, it might mean something to someone else too. So hit like, leave a comment, or subscribe. That's how YouTube knows to share with others. Maybe together we can help someone see things a little differently.